Alright, so if you're wondering why I am currently laying in my bed, the answer is because I threw my back out last weekend and I'm still in the recovery process. It's been a whole thing. I have the body of a 90-year-old woman. It's fine. But we are at the point in my new project where we need to start looking at world building settings very seriously. And the thing with this is because I really want to be intentional about my society and my culture that I'm creating for this project, and I want that to have a lot of connections with like the physical geography and the physical world. I'm really working on the cultural world building process next. Like that's the guide series I'm going to be doing next as I go through it. And so I just want to really dive into that, really think about it, really learn a lot about that and be intentional and try and make it all make sense. So I have laid out a list of requirements that I have based off the high level story requirements I have so far based off the society I know I want to build, and then I'm going to try and figure out which physical setting sort of makes sense for that, and then I'm going to create my physical world map and figure out where I want my new society to live. And then from there I can really dive a lot more into making regional maps, starting to flesh it out, because if you've seen any of my world building guide videos, doing these world building maps take me a very, very long time. I've actually already started working on the world map. I have no idea where I'm gonna put my society yet. I have no idea. I haven't gotten to that part yet. But I've been building up, the topography maps, the ocean circulation, the climates. I'm working on the biomap now, which I'll get into showing you kind of what I've been working on for that in a little bit, but this is kind of where we gotta start here, because I need to figure all of this out so I can get started on all of that and just be really intentional about it all. And it just sort of felt like where I was getting stuck, where I wanted to ask more questions about this, but I didn't have enough information, so that's where we're going. So the first thing on my list for the society for my next project is that I want to have larger family units with a more family focused mindset, with a sort of sense of obligation but not obedience, right? I want the culture to be a lot more, kinship family focused, but I don't want it to be super extreme. So to accomplish that, in order to have a reason for large groups to work together, for family ties to be very important and serious, I am going to want probably either a more difficult agricultural system that requires that sort of structure, or land in general that requires more communal infrastructure to, sustain and to create. So that gives me a little bit of limitations, but again, you can see a lot of that everywhere. There's only a few kind of climates and physical environments that are incredibly easy. And we're not talking about the modern age. The modern age is very different, right? We're talking, this is going to be maybe late Renaissance. We're maybe looking at 1700s maybe. And then the next one is that I don't want overwhelmingly strict social guidelines, because I need my main characters to leave their families, right, and go to this, mansion that they're going to be living in together to accomplish their goal, right? So I can't have it be they're going completely against society to do that. That has to be somewhat societally okay, which again ties into the structure of the family can't be that concrete if I'm gonna have that happen, which basically means it just, nothing can be too extreme. These people are probably not living in the middle of a desert, in on the tippy top of a mountain, but also can't be a super lush fertile river valley where things are super duper easy, because I don't want to be on either end of the spectrum, right? So the next one is I really want to have architecture that encompasses a lot of nature, that has a very down-to-earth sort of feel to it and everything. So I sort of have this idea of a Gothic courtyard manor kind of a vibe, because it just incorporates a lot of nature. It pulls in the Gothic feeling of that almost academia type vibe without being too European, I guess. And then I have because of that, essentially is, so I did a lot of research on courtyard homes and the different like societies and cultures and climates where you see those, and they tend to be hot climates, because those types of courtyard homes have advantages to how they allow like air to flow around them and how they allow. But courtyard homes are very common in hot climates because they're very good for helping to regulate temperatures in the buildings without any sort of like modern like air conditioning or anything like that, right? So very good for hot climates, particularly when you have like larger family units, because it makes sense to have that sort of larger house structure in that case, which fits into what I have. And it's actually usually for drier climates as well, but not exclusively. So the most important thing is a hot climate. The next thing is nature, plants, herbs, etc. are a really, really big deal in my story. I want a whole potion crafting system, which means that I need to have a climate and a biome with sufficient biodiversity and greenness that there would be a lot of options, right? Like I want the world to have that lush sort of feeling, which again leans itself fairly well for a more like, tropical, hotter climate. And then the next one is I need political conflict. So the society itself, I want it to be a little bit more isolated. Like maybe in the past it hasn't had to deal too much with external societies, but now in my story age, like, that's starting to be more of an issue where people, like, they're going to be invaded, right? So, like, I need that to provide some sort of natural barriers, like mountains, deserts, oceans, significant rivers, something like that. But for it to still be reasonable for them to be invaded by this other society. So, like, wherever I put them on the map, I need to really look at, like, where could invasions come from, and I need it to be possible with enough motivation, but not, like, literally impossible, right? So that's one of my requirements. The next one is I want society to be about as advanced as the other ones. I don't want any sort of, like, significantly more advanced or not advanced societies. I want the ones that I'm dealing with in this story to be pretty equal. Which means that I need the general areas to be about as equal as possible, right? Like, I don't want to put one society in a really, really difficult to succeed environment where they're going to be struggling a lot, or it's not going to lend itself more towards, like, larger civilization, right? And then ones that, like, really, really would be super easy to live in, right? Like, I just kind of have to pick environments that are about equally-ish as easy to advance in, and like there's a lot of wiggle room in that because history is really complicated. People can migrate, like trade and influence, and the ability to share information and ideas is very significant. And like I'm not a big fan in like geographic determinism, like at its root, right? Like the actual determinism part of it. But I think that it would be a lot harder to buy, like, people in, like, the super lush river valley versus, like, these people that live on the, like, arid desert that's also on the top of the mountains and they can only, like, live by herding in small groups of 10 or 15. Like, right, like, those aren't going to be able to compete with each other in a militaristic way equitably. So that is one of my requirements. So then, what I am looking at, right, is this sort of leans itself towards a hotter climate, something that's a little bit more tropical, but a little hotter, a little bit more tropical where it's like lush and green. I'm not going as far as like rainforest, right? Because that's very difficult. So in a lot of ways, this is a fairly easy environment to live in, and I need it to be a little bit more difficult because I want it to have that more structure needed, right? More of a strong family unit where there's more strict social norms because, they've had to have a lot of social control in order to be successful as a civilization. So the thing that I've been leaning towards is having complicated agriculture. And this is actually something that, like, I'll get into when I do my cultural world building guide series, but there's something called rice culture, which is very, very interesting because in order to do, I guess, rice agriculture, to grow rice at a large scale, you have to have these complex, like, irrigation systems, like these, like, tiered, like, terraces, or, like, you have to flood like have irrigation systems where you flood the rice paddies at a large scale at the exact same time. So it requires a lot of like community communication and what's the word? Collaboration. Like it's kind of one of those things that like you can't have individual farmers doing it by themselves like you can with like, you know, a lot of like wheat crops and stuff like that, where like one farmer can kind of just like grow their own stuff. It requires a community to do it together and work together, which requires there to be a lot stronger community, like control and norms and all of that. And so you see a lot of very common cultural trends in societies that are where they heavily rely on rice, right, for the survival of the people. That you see these cultures that are a lot more family-based, that have larger family units, that have more like, I don't want to say like super strict social norms and stuff, but like there is more of a sense of community focus versus individualistic focus, right? It's focused on the well-being and the needs of the community versus the well-being and needs of the individual. Because that's the only way the civilization would survive, or, you know, the main way in a rice culture versus like a wheat culture. And I find this fascinating. I cannot tell you how many articles I've read on it, and I still have a few more I want to read. And that's just kind of touching on it. I'm not going to super go into it, but basically, I think this leans towards me picking an area that's sort of like a climate zone, maybe sort of like Southern America, sort of like more central Southern China, maybe like one of those places where it's like kind of lush. We're not quite rainforest, but we're talking like a tropical or subtropical forest that is like relatively green, right? They have enough wood and stuff to easily create buildings, but then they have rice culture. And I want to also tie into that rice culture and like the reasons why rice requires this sort of like infrastructure and agriculture. I want to tie that into my magic system too. So that's sort of what I'm thinking. That's sort of what I'm thinking I want. So from a perspective of just picking a place on my map that has the right climate zone, that's going to be pretty easy. And I have a range, right? Because basically I want to look at where rice... Hold on. My daughter is out of her room. Hold on. False alarm. She was just hiding in the corner. Everything is fine. I just need to like find the right spot. But I think the harder thing is going to be, of those spots, what would be the most like geographically protected, right? Because I don't know if I'm gonna have a spot on my map that's just like, look at this like cute little like patch of CFA, CFB climate region surrounded by mountains, right? If I had been really wanting to focus on just this part of the world, because like part of my world building is I want to be able to use this world and this magic system for a lot of stories because it's really cool and I'm going to spend a lot of time on it. So I just kind of started with making a like land masses and like topography that I thought would create a lot of variation so that I would have a lot of different types of things in the world and it wouldn't be too like uniform or, you know. So I focused on doing that instead of trying to create a world that matched the climate I wanted with the geography I wanted, which is what I did for my last project, which is sort of like in a taiga, boreal forest, in an isolated, like, sort of like super large valley surrounded by like mountains and then desert, and like it's kind of isolated. And I focused on that to create the exact climate I wanted in that part of the world with those land masses. So I didn't do that this time, so it might be a little bit difficult, but I think combining like rice culture, and again, I can have like it be a variation on rice if I really end up needing to. I can have there be like magical influences on it. Like I have a lot of options, but I'm very excited to get to that stage. So the next thing that I need to do is finish my actual physical world so I can figure out where my people are going to go. That's the next step. So I've been drawing this for, I think I said this earlier, but like a month or two slowly. And I am done my climate region maps. I actually just posted it on my channel. If you subscribe, I posted like the climate region map on my channel and I got some good feedback. No one pointed out any like stupid mistakes, so I think it's pretty good. And I've started working on the biomes. I think I need to go finish working with that a little bit. But I will play some like fun, what's it even called, like B-roll of my process. I've like filmed very random pieces of me working on this, and then I'll give you a tour when we're done. Alright, hi. So I am back here on the bed again, and I probably, my children are still awake and going to sleep, so they're going to be shouting, just ignore them. But I probably could have sat at my desk. I'm doing a lot better, but I kind of overdid it. No, maybe not overdid it, but I definitely reached my limit trying to get a little bit cleaned up today. So we're in bed again, but I finished, and I'll start screen recording this. Go. All right. I'm now screen recording. So this is the climate map, which you've already seen, but what is new, and this is just a layer, but I have a layer where I added on, where is it? The topographic, like, mountain ranges, so this is my finished climate map, which I did actually finish a couple of days ago, and I actually really like how this looks. I posted it and shared it, and people seem to like it, and I think I talked about this with you a little bit already, but there's a lot of variation in here, and the types of climate regions we have, and the types of, like, shapes and topography, and the ways these continents are split up, so I'm pretty happy about that. And then let me zoom out. I'm sorry, I'm really bad at, like, I do this with my fingers, which is why it, like, rotates every time, and I need to figure out a better way to do it, but I suck at Photoshop, so. But this is my bio map, which I'm very, very excited about. There's definitely, like, you have a lot of almost every single type here, like, in a reasonable amount. You know, like, there's a crap ton of the temperate broadleaf mixed forest, but, like, that's pretty reasonable. So I'm just, like, I'm pretty excited about this. There's no overwhelming number of deserts. Like, there's a decent little number of deserts, but, like, they're pretty reasonable deserts. So I'm, all in all, very happy with how this looks. So the next step, right, is I've been trying to figure out where I want my first, like, not my first, but, like, my main society, nation to be for my book projects, right? So, like, now we're moving from, like, generic world to specifically for my book, right? So that is why I created this map, which has just a little reminder of where the mountains are. It just helps me see them a little bit better when I'm looking at the different other maps, and to remind me of sort of what the topography is. But the first thing I wanted to do, right, was figure out where rice would grow, because I know that I want a rice culture, and I want it to be more warmer, so that all kind of works out. So what I did was I researched it a little bit, and you can see here rice grows anywhere where it's hot and humid. So the main climate zones or climate regions are going to be AM for tropical monsoon, and CFA and CWA for humid subtropics. And then also there needs to be enough available water for, like, irrigation. It can't just be general rainfall in that area. It has to be coming. You also have to have a lot of water, like, in rivers. So if all the headwaters are pretty dry and there's not a lot of rain up there and there's not a lot of water in the rivers, it won't necessarily be as good of an area for rice farming, is kind of the way I understand it. And I'm going to have to do a lot more research on that at some point. But you can see here, I basically colored in pink, very roughly, everywhere that is one of those climates. So the pink is all the AM, CFA, and CWA. And you can see there's a lot of chunks. These are all between 40 and 40 degrees north and south, which seems reasonable to me, right? And then what I did is the, like, teal arrows, right? These are representing where the water would be coming from, and I was essentially looking at just, like, the climate map. And I was like, okay, like, these, I can't point for you, but right in here, right, like, this part of the mountain range is going to have a decent little bit of water. Those are, I believe, CFA or CF climate regions above that, which get a decent amount of rain. Same thing over here. Like, this is going to be very wet. So down here, there's going to be plenty of water feeding down into there for rice farming. This one I'm less sure about. I don't know if they would actually be able to rice farm here for a couple of reasons that we'll get into, but all the rivers for here are going to be coming from pretty arid regions. So the rivers are going to be pretty light, pretty dry, right? There's no mountain ranges in this area that are going to feed any sort of large amount of water. So while it might get enough rain for rice to grow, like I don't know if they'd be able to irrigate well enough. Like they might in the lower parts, more by the coast, where like water has had time to like accumulate in the rivers. I'm not sure. So that's like a maybe one. I didn't star it, but all the ones that I starred with these little like gold stars, I think would have sufficient like river flow for irrigation. And again, I know very little about irrigation right now, so this is kind of just, I'm going to have to go through and like figure this out in a more correct manner later, but I'm just trying to figure out where I want to pick my civilization, right? So like my like wiggle room might be off, but like I'm going to go hard on the like, it has to definitely be a good place for it, and I'll go with somewhere like that, right? So I did that. I have all of the rice areas. So these are all my options, right? Starting options. And there's a lot of them, right? So I started playing around with some of the research and processes I've been putting together for the cultural world building guide. And I'm sort of playing with them a little bit. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what I'm doing, but this is not the guide yet. I'm playing around with it. I haven't finished my research. I haven't finished putting these together. This is all very like rough, kind of maybe. Like I'm getting vibes here, right? So don't like copy this or anything because it's, you know. But let me take rice out. The first thing I wanted to do was put in cultural divides. So areas where there wouldn't be as much like cultural transfer or like civilizations wouldn't necessarily cross these boundaries, right? Because civilizations tend to expand in similar areas that have like, you know, like the same types of agriculture, the same types of, you know, ways of living, right? That sort of tends to be the easiest way in earlier times that civilizations expanded, right? So like you're not going to go from a, you know, tropical woodland to a desert, right? Like a civilization that succeeds there isn't going to be equipped to live in that other place, right? So I did little borders or barriers for mountain ranges, deserts, extremely cold and polar climates, and those are the dark purple, right? So like if we look here, you can see that this mountain range here, right? Like the civilizations on either side of that are not going to be crossing the mountain range. And I did circle the mountainous area because, you know, you could have a civilization in the mountains like you see in South America. So I kind of tried to, you know, keep that in mind. So all of those borders, very arid areas and deserts are all marked there, right? So you can sort of see that. And then I did light purple in a few places just to represent like plains to hills. And then the other two things I did, well, the next two things I did, right, was I have dots for deserts just so I can clearly see where the deserts are. And then I have these little like purple areas, light purple that's like backticked or backslashed, cross hashed, I don't know, for rainforests. And you can definitely have advanced civilizations in rainforests. Like there is definitely evidence of that happening. It's a thing that you can do. It is possible, but it is definitely not something that like is going to be as easy, right? And it's also like going to make having a large settled, like permanently settled civilization would be really hard in a rainforest. You would tend to have like a couple of like big cities that might like migrate a little bit over time, right? Because if you watched my biome video, the really only agriculture that works there is going to be slash and burn, which means you have to cut down and burn the trees in order to have that ash fertilize the ground enough that you can build crops there, but then that's going to deplete the soil and then you have to move somewhere else, right? So like it's not as sustainable, so that's not going to be areas I'm looking at for this, even though there is some overlap, which we will get to. So in theory, each of these lines is separating areas of different like civilizations or civilization groups that are going to be very similar in terms of like how they survive and their agriculture and like all of that sort of stuff. So then the next thing I did from this, because this wasn't enough, but let's see. You can sort of see here that some of these pink are actually rainforest. So like over in here, a lot of that is rainforest. A lot of this is all rainforest. And so I think there is some wiggle room where like you could cut into the rainforest a little bit probably over time, or like maybe it's not all perfectly, like, you know, there's wiggle room. This isn't a 100% exact science, but like I'm kind of trying to avoid those areas. But if we ignore that, let's leave that in. The next thing I did, and don't get overwhelmed by this is all really rough. I'm going to actually do this correctly later, but I added in rough cultures. And this is very, very, very vague. This is just so that I can't hold a lot of stuff in my head at one time. I have to write it out like this. So I marked all my rice cultures that were rice cultures, and I just kind of marked like very roughly what type of people I would see there, right? So like this island, right here, this group of islands there, if you look at the biomes, that's all basically the same biome, right? And if you look at climate, it's pretty similar, right? You have that, I think that's DFB, I think, and then a little bit of Taiga up in the mountain range, but like that's similar enough that one like seafaring type group could probably settle all of that, right? Kind of reminds me of like maybe like Japan, you know, multiple islands, you know, it's a whole thing. So I have that, or it could be a group of seafaring people that are like interconnected. Up here you have agricultural, again, that's all, you know, could be separate civilizations, like actual groups in there, but like it's all kind of same. You're probably looking at like wheat culture, which is basically just not rice culture right now. I'm not that into that process yet. And I just kind of went through and marked all of these, like where I sort of thought there would be a big distinction in the groups that live there, and kind of some like key terms for me to sort of think about how they would be able to interact with each other, right? Whether they would trade, like all that sort of stuff. So I went through and did that for the whole map, just to work for my brain, right? And so you can sort of see there's a few key areas that are sort of standing out as options right now. And let me create another layer and pick like, what's a color I haven't really used? Green, like a bright green. Okay. So this rice culture, right, is definitely an option, right? There's no heavy rainforest there. That would be an option. In here, kind of, is an option. This is an option. Down here is an option. I think this one right here is too small. This one here is too small. All of the stuff in here, too small, other than maybe this is possible. This is possible. This is possible, right? So I currently have, oh wait, and over, whoa, sorry. Over here, that's possible. Let me zoom out. Okay. Yeah, so I have like a handful of options. And so it's still kind of hard, because not only do I need like the right kind of area for my society, I need to be able to create the right geopolitical landscape. And so if I look at some of these areas, so like if I look right here, this is a rice culture, right? There's another rice culture right here. Like there's pretty good reason to think that there's going to be traders, especially up through that like more desert steppe region where they're going to trade with each other. They've probably made contact. There's going to be some sort of like interactions there. Not to say it's good, but like there can be cultural exchange pretty easily between those civilizations. There would be enough similarities probably between their cultures for that sort of an exchange to be pretty good. And then if you look up here, all of these, let me turn on biomes. Yeah, so you can see across here, like there's pretty consistent biomes across this whole northern part of this continent. And you can sort of see in the climate regions, like these are fairly, they're obviously not the same, but like they're close enough in terms of how it would affect the people that can live there. So you would see a lot of exchange happening between these top cultures over on the more western coast, over on that eastern coast bit, and then even in the mountains. I think there would definitely be like a mountain civilization here because it's such like so temperate. Oh, my battery's low. Hopefully that doesn't die. If it does, yeah. But anyway, the one thing here is that there is direct contact between this rice culture and this like more temperate wheat culture over here. like they would have absolute trading and communication and stuff, which would moderate the rice culture down here a little bit and the wheat culture, right? Like there would be cultural exchange happening just due to that literal touching proximity. And it would probably be like, it might be kind of a little bit of a rough relationship because there would be some dissimilarities, but like they would probably even themselves out a little bit maybe. I'm not sure. So that's kind of the vibe I'm getting there. And then like for this one, it's literally surrounded by essentially just like either mountains or like deserts, rainforest, right? Like this one is pretty isolated other than that like far off reach with this one, and then up here like there would be trading going on in this region, but like they're pretty isolated, which I don't think they would be invaded by any of the other civilizations. Like I just don't think it makes sense for any of the other civilizations around here to try and occupy a nation that was right here, because like they're either crossing mountains, they're crossing deserts, they're crossing the ocean, right? Like this one I think is going to be out, right? Like it is too isolated. What are my other options? Let's see, what do we got down here? So this one, let's see, there's again a lot of contact with a potential like temperate wheat civilization below it, right? So there'd be a lot of exchange there, might even be mixed. It's not quite as isolated as I think I want it to be. And then you also have like a Mediterranean seafaring kind of culture over here. Like this one is very much like, there's no geographic barriers. So this area would probably be pretty strife with conflict, and a lot of these civilizations would probably be warring each other. Just because none of them have that natural feeling of being protected, right? They're not isolated, they don't have their barriers. Like, nations will feel a lot safer if they have, like, a buffer from other people attacking them, right? And none of these civilizations here have that, right? Like, they're all very exposed to other groups within each other. Like, there's, like, you know, you would have a little bit of mountainous protection between some of the eastern ones and the northeastern ones, or the western ones, across the mountain range, right? Like, no one's crossing that big mountain range, but, like, still there's enough around there that I think that one might be too exposed and might lead to more of a, like, I want them to be more isolated, right? So I think this one is out as well. Let's see, what are we looking at over here? So this one is pretty good. It's slightly similar where it also has a decent bit of exposure with other nations. However, if I pull up the actual topography map, you know, like there's hills here, a little bit in here, right? Like in terms of where the river basins would be, like they would be separated from a like river watershed, like navigatable river kind of perspective. So like I don't think this one's ruled out because of that. There's like wheat civilizations, Mediterranean, like there's a decent bit of different cultures here, and I know I need at least 2 nations. But this one might be too small unless I just have there be more smaller civilizations, right? Like this one that I've circled as rice culture, that could actually be like 2, 3, 4 different civilizations, right? Like there's water separating them, right? This little island could be one. Maybe I pick this island. That could be an option. Like I could break this up a lot more, and then I think that would work. So this is definitely an option. I'm not going with that. This one has the same issue where I think this one's too isolated, right? Like you have rainforests, you have very nomadic groups because this is all like savanna and deserts. Like you're not going to have... I may need to go help her. But you're not going to have enough like agriculture there to support large groups. So like I just don't think there would be any reason for this group to be invaded or involved in any sort of geopolitical conflict like I need. Same thing with up here. It's too isolated. Very safe, right? They're probably very like this is sort of where you would get a culture like China that was very isolated for a very long time. Or not China, but like that group of nations over there, you know? There's a lot of them, but like I've been watching a lot of like Chinese and Korean dramas and stuff. Hold on. Wait, is my husband coming up? Okay, I am back, and after this is over, my husband has now tempted me with watching Poldark and having a snack, which I'm very excited about. That's the new show we're watching right now. But where were we? I think we were looking at this civilization here, right? So this one is fairly isolated, right? You might have some smaller civilizations here splitting up this region just because it's very like stretched out, right? There's going to be a lot of separate like rivers shooting off here that's going to break it up a little bit. You have rainforest, you have some more nomadic savanna. You might have some like rice land kind of stretching into this like spot like right here. So you might see a little bit of that there. But it's pretty isolated other than right here. There's like maybe like a wheat or seafaring based civilization there. But most of the interaction here for this civilization would be by sea, right? You have another rice culture right north of it, right over here, right? Like these two can interact with each other and stuff. The problem is, who would be invading them, right? Because they would need to be able to occupy, they kind of need to be equally big or like larger from a military standpoint. So like this is going to be too small. That's like a little strip. It's going to be too small. They won't be able to do it. There's nowhere nearby that's going to have anything significant enough. So it would have to come from up here, which doesn't really make a ton of sense. Honestly, like I don't think there's anyone that would be able to do there. So I think we're going to cross those off too. So that leaves this one. And this one is in a pretty good spot. It has that same connection where there's probably going to be a lot of like sea trade, a lot of ports, a lot of focus on, you know, a navy and ships. They would have interaction with maybe these small little coastal civilizations here, but then there's a lot going on up here. And somewhere up here would be our like enemy force, right? Would be one of these guys up here. But would they try to occupy this civilization? I struggle to believe it. Like, it's theoretically possible, but, like, I just think it's unlikely that would happen. Just because, like, they're not crossing by land, right? Like, I mean, let me turn up the topographic map. I guess they could, like, along this region here, right? Let me pull up climate map. That's steppe region, so it would have to go through steppe, which isn't too bad. It's better than like, you know, marching an army through a desert, but it's still not ideal. Biome wise, so that is, I think like steppe woodland? Tropical steppe? No, that's just tropical steppe. Yeah, so would be difficult to march an army through for sure. So, I don't know if I think this is reasonable. I definitely don't think a sea pass is reasonable. And, let's see, what's biomes again? Yeah, so there's desert in this area here. So there's like a pass here that they could possibly come through. Is that reasonable? Do I think that's reasonable? I don't know. Maybe? So it's either that. What were my other options? So I've ruled everything out on that continent. So we're looking at here with this continent as the focus. We're looking at up here, which would either be, you know, an invasion from these people directly, but I don't think I want them to be that close. So, I mean, it could come from the mountains. That's definitely possible. Because they're a mountain civilization. I don't know why a mountain civilization would come down like that. They're not being occupied to, like, take over, so the fact that they're dissimilar isn't the end of the world, but these guys could definitely travel through here to invade or occupy, right? Like, that's shortgrass prairie or steppe prairie, I think, and then a little bit of steppe region, right? Like, that's definitely doable. I don't necessarily know why they would. Like, I kind of imagine them trying to occupy other people. But, like, maybe if they were, like, also going down here and maybe, like, you know, invading these people. Maybe it's, like, multiple groups up here. So, like, you know, they're going on a train. I don't know. But that's what I'd be looking at there, I think. And then, what was our other option? We ruled this continent out. So we'd be looking at these people. So I could pretty easily see an invasion coming from over here. Or if it's like this island, like you could definitely see these people invading. Or even one of the other rice cultures, right, could be invading, potentially, right? Like, you do have a lot of options there. These guys could be invading. I think it could come from almost any of these, right? Like, so I think this one would work pretty easily. So that leaves me down to 1, 2, 3 options that I have right now. Oh gosh, I don't know how to choose. Okay, this is the struggle, right? Like, I need to decide what I want to create, right? Because, like, this continent here, right, could be pretty isolated. They would probably have some amount of seafaring trade, right? Like, maybe with this group here, with these islands, probably with this coast here, right? There would be some sea trade there. So, like, they'd be aware of that part of the world. But also, this gives me, like, a succinct area to focus on, right? Like, I could just really build out this, and that would be more than enough for my first book. So that's, like, a pretty isolated example that I could go with. If I go here, this is a little bit more complicated because you would have nomadic groups up in here, which, like, would probably raid. Yeah, so, like, I'd have to world build that out. I'd have to world build, like, this would potentially be complicated. There would be a lot of, like, seafaring going on. So, like, they'd be interacting with a lot of places. Like, there's no natural boundary here to the scope of the world I'd have to, like, be aware of to an extent, right? So that one's a lot more open, potentially. And then this one over here, I don't know, this one's maybe sort of in the middle. Like, you have a lot going on in all directions. Would it necessarily be being invaded per se? There's not as much. Well, yeah, I don't think they would be as much here as, like, you know, maybe some raiding happening in this direction with the nomadic traders. But mainly I imagine that, you know, trading would be what would be happening through those deserts. Like, nomadic trading groups that can kind of travel through, know where all the oases are that they can stop on their way, interacting with these other groups. So, like, they might know the name of these other places just from a trading perspective, like having traded from them, knowing what goods come from them. But they mainly only have a lot of interactions with these two groups here. The, like, one in the sort of, like, Plains Valley north of them and the mountain civilization, which could be interesting. Like, that does leave me some interesting options to go with. That would be interesting. Down here, we ruled that out. Down here, there's no reasons for people to live in the mountains here. They're really, really cold. There's a lot of, like, colder temperate civilizations. Like, this one is going to be cold. These would maybe be slightly less diverse in terms of, like, the types of culture and civilizations. Like, I mean, obviously I could do weird stuff with them, but, like, you know, it would be a little bit more same in terms of what I'm starting with. But that could still be fun. Up here, again, it's both very isolated but not. So it's like they wouldn't have any, like, direct relationships with much of anyone, which does make it pretty isolated, which might make them a little bit more extreme in terms of the rice culture. So maybe I'm leaning away from this one because they would have little interaction from other places, and I do think that invasion is a little bit less likely. So we're gonna do it. We're gonna roll them out. We need to come down to 1 anyway. So I don't know. I'm gonna need to think on it. But if you have an opinion between this down here and kind of really focusing on this island, maybe like having a vague concept of this civilization here, right? But then mostly that's kind of it. Or going up here and having this sort of a thing. Like, let me know what you think I should go with. No promises that I won't have already decided by then, but like, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are, because my mind is definitely not made up right now. But yeah, I think this is like, I've reached the point, right, where I have created a world map and I can decide where I want to put my people. And I think you can sort of start to see why I felt stuck with the way I world build, with trying to develop the society and like because a lot of it's based off this conflict with this other nation, right? And so I need to set it up in a way where that makes sense, but like I don't really know much about that other nation or where they'd be coming from or why they'd be doing it. Like, being able to see the geography here really helps with understanding like how this occupation would be working, what kind of allies they would have in the area. Like, you know, like it is very, very helpful to have this, to be able to make that sort of a decision, because like the civilization that would be here, right, with this interaction with these other very close interaction with these other civilizations would be very different than down here. Maybe not like that different, but like a lot of these are very, very different. This one would be a lot more like seafaring, right? There's going to be a lot more sea trade, a lot more fishing. This one up here is probably going to be a lot more landlocked. They don't have a ton of reasons. Like, they would definitely have it, but like there's differences. There's just differences. Just go with it. There are differences. It makes a big difference to me, and I need to decide what I want, and I don't know what I want, but I think I have gotten far enough in this video, other than deciding the actual spot my civilization is going to be. So, yes. Let me know if you have any thoughts, if you have any ideas, if you think the way I'm doing this is like weird, or like maybe I'm missing something, because I am still just kind of starting to put together like my world building guide for doing this exact thing, right? So like this is all just like pulling out of my head from little research and things that I've read, not me actually like condensing it all and really sitting down and thinking about it. So, you know, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go watch Poldark with my husband and have a snack, as my children call it. Yeah, and I will see you in the next one.